Guys, I'm at the famous Jekyll Island Club Hotel, which was owned by J.P. Morgan and his associates, his own personal island. And this is the island that's famous for bringing all the biggest bankers from New York City, along with Senator Nelson Aldrich, down here on his private train to conspire to make the Federal Reserve Bank in the U.S. in 1910. As I have my traditional American bacon and egg breakfast, it reminds me of the connection between the bankers who came here to start the Federal Reserve and the person who actually convinced the American public that bacon and eggs was the right type of breakfast. This person is also the person who convinced American women that it was a sign of class and freedom to smoke cigarettes. So how are these bankers connected to women smoking cigarettes? For that, we have to go 900 miles north, where I just came from in New York City, to the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. And as nice as this hotel is, the Waldorf Astoria was known as the most luxurious, most fancy hotel at the time in 1934 when this event took place. So let's go pop over back to New York City. So how does a plate of bacon and eggs on Jekyll Island tie in to the Federal Reserve? Here's how. Bacon and egg breakfast was not common in the US or most places. Most Americans just had some kind of bread or toast and coffee for breakfast. But the ham manufacturers in America wanted to change that, and they hired Edward Bernays to convince Americans that they needed a hearty breakfast. And they did that by Bernays surveying 5,000 doctors and got them to say that 4,500 of them recommended a hearty breakfast like bacon and eggs. So just like that, the typical American breakfast went from something like bread to something like eggs and bacon. And the bacon makers sold a lot of bacon. But it doesn't end there. As most people know, Bernays is credited with getting women to smoke cigarettes. And this is where the connection to Frank Vanderlip, the CEO of what's now Citibank and one of the conspirators for the Federal Reserve on Jekyll Island, comes in. Because his wife, Narcissa, was the host of the famous Green Ball right here at the Waldorf Astoria behind me, the most grand hotel in all of New York City at the time in 1934. So before we get to the Green Ball, we have to talk about 1929, when Bernays was hired by tobacco manufacturers to try to convince women that they should smoke cigarettes. Because before that, only very degenerate and prostitute type women smoked cigarettes, and that was the stigma of smoking cigarettes. If you did that, you are a very low class type of woman. So how did Bernays change that? During the Easter parade in Manhattan, he hired a bunch of women, and he specified that he didn't want them to be too pretty, he didn't want them to be ugly, but he didn't want them to look like models. He wanted them to look like everyday type of women. And they came out, and he hired photographers, and he made sure the press was there to take pictures of these women that were lighting up, a whole bunch of them, and proud of it. And this was their freedom moment. They even called these cigarettes torches of freedom. So that was the precursor to the strong and independent and stunning and brave type of woman back then. So that worked very well, and women started smoking cigarettes. The problem is, one of his clients who made Lucky Strike cigarettes, the pack of the cigarettes was a red circle with white in the middle, but the rest of the pack was green. And green was not a popular color, or it clashed with women's clothes. It was not fashionable, and so women were totally okay with picking up this habit that's going to give them cancer. But if the package is going to clash with their outfit, that cannot stand. So the tobacco manufacturer told Bernays about their problem, and Bernays said, well, simple, just change the color of the packaging. And they said, well, we couldn't do that because we already spent millions of dollars on advertising. So their solution
was to create this really big event called the Green Ball. And in it, they were going to convince women that green is a fashionable color. And the way they did this, not by saying, hey, Lucky Strikes is promoting this ball so that you like their cigarette packaging. No, they didn't even mention who sponsored this ball. So they got all the clothing and fashion manufacturers, the fashion magazines, the famous people, the influencers, the rich people, the jet set, all of these people together. They even brought intellectuals to give talks on why green is such a good color to try to convince women of this. And they even held a luncheon featuring all kinds of green foods, and they even hired an art professor to talk about green in all the great works of art. So they pulled out all the stops with all types of influencers to change women's opinion about the color. So who was Narcissa, and why did she try to dupe women to get more of them to smoke? Was she just some evil person? Well, she was actually a leading New York suffragist and was the co-founder of the League of Women's Voters in New York. And in 1929, she became the president for New York's Infirmary for Women and Children, which she held for 37 years. So she was all about trying to help women get a better position, apparently, but in this case, she was helping them get cancer. Now, to be fair, most people did not know back then that cigarettes cause cancer. Even commercials had doctors recommending smoking. So you can't really blame her for that, but to try to convince women to do something that was seen as only lower classes and all of that, that is not very good in my opinion. Maybe she was not told that it was sponsored by tobacco companies and she was just doing it for the money that this charity was raising for her New York Women and Children's Infirmary. But either way, she hosted this thing and she ran it and she got all the press, and maybe because of her name and her connections and her clout, she was able to attract a lot more high society and all of that thing. Either way, this was definitely not a win for women. So even though the Green Ball was a success, eventually during World War II, Lucky Strikes changed the packaging. They said because of a shortage of war materials for the green dye of the package, which was probably BS, and so they went to a white and red packaging. But with women smoking now, tobacco companies saw an opportunity for their own women's brand. And so they marketed Virginia Slims in 1968. They made them thinner and longer, not shorter and fatter like the men's cigarettes, to emulate what a woman's figure should be: tall, thin, and slim. And so the marketing of Virginia Slims was all about women's independence, and this was around the time of the feminist movement and all of that. And so their slogan was, "You've come a long way, baby." And they would show women before and women supposedly now.
You've come a long, long way from days when man was king. You couldn't vote, you couldn't smoke, you couldn't do a thing. Then you started fighting, and things started going your way.
You won the 19th Amendment, yeah. All the walls started crumbling, yeah. You've come a long, long way, yeah. You've come a long way, baby, to get where you got to today.
This is the Slim cigarette made just for women. New Virginia Slims, with rich Virginia flavor you'll like. Slimmer than the fat cigarettes men smoke. New Virginia Slims.
You got your own cigarette now, baby. You've come a long, long way.
So what does convincing women to smoke have to do with finance? A lot, because they are using these type of tactics to sell you all kinds of products, especially stuff that you don't even need, or things like in this case are actually bad for you and will eventually kill you. And so these same type of tactics were used to sell the Federal Reserve Bill, to sell the whole COVID shutdown and all of that stuff. Same type of tactics that are used for global warming and all this kind of stuff. And these are also the same type of tactics they're going to use to push the central bank digital currency when they're ready to push that. You're going to see all kinds of famous people, scientists, finance people, famous finance people, Bill Ackman, all these, Warren Buffett's type people. They're all going to converge all at one time when they're ready to push this thing, or whatever the next big thing they're trying to push is. So when you see all these people pushing the same thing all at once from different walks of life, think about who's organizing that, who's paying for that, and what's their goal. Because as much as you think you're not affected by these types of manipulations, we all are. If we weren't, there would be no such thing as advertising, because it wouldn't work, right? So if you think these manipulations don't work, just take a look at what was considered normal back then and what is considered normal today. You've come a long way, baby. Indeed.
You've come a long way, baby, to get where you got to